Hello, this is James Hunter, and I'm making a video today about anxiety. I'm going to talk about some concepts in terms of how we can respond to anxiety, ideas of how to manage it. And with everything going on in 2020, I figured now is good as a time of any to do a video and discuss anxiety, fear, stress. And I want to talk about things this year that are, let's be honest, they're different. We have a lot of things going on that are sources of stress or based on how we perceive and what and how we react or respond can either increase anxiety and fear at that stress level, or things that we can do to help bring anxiety down and have better, healthier coping skills. So with everything going on, the COVID-19, the pandemic, the shutdown, now the economy is trying to reopen back up, and how for some people it's affected employment, finances, things like that, just to name a couple. I'm going to get into some other areas in this video as far as how that anxiety level has been increased. You have things that are expected periodically, like hurricanes. Those of us who live in Corpus Christi on the coast by the water, people in Florida, other places, you get the idea. They can expect within reasonable predictability, or that they're going to have a hurricane season, if you will, or a tropical storm, hurricane, various categories, and so on. That can, brings a bit about of anxiety, some stress, fear, right? We talk about how that impacts our behavior. So we have that. We have a presidential election in November. Every 4 years, we elect a new president, and so on. So elections are something that come about, and you can talk about partisan politics, Republican, Democrat, ideological viewpoints, differences that people have. Not everybody agrees on the same type of issues. So you have these being more highlighted or pronounced because of an election season. That can be a source of stress. That can heighten anxiety, potential for conflict, and so on. So we have it's like a snowball effect of a lot of things compounding these sources of stress. I think there was even a thing about so-called murder hornets that maybe lived less than a week in the news, and people were making a joke about that. But there's something to be said about fears. So before I get into the direction I'm going to move this video into, I'm going to go over some concepts of anxiety and fear. And the direction I'm going to move the video into is making anxiety work for you. Because actually, anxiety does have a purpose, and it is something that's not all of it's bad. It tends to get a stigma or negative connotation that it's something that, oh, you need to get rid of anxiety, it's bad for you, it can be problematic. And I'm going to establish two different things to that issue after I read this definition. So straight from the DSM-5, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, I'm going to go ahead and read a definition up here. So anxiety, fear is the emotional response to real or perceived. The perceived is a very important word to discuss later. Imminent threat, whereas anxiety is the anticipation of future threat or threats. So one more time, fear is the emotional response to real or perceived imminent threat, whereas anxiety is the anticipation of a future threat. So if you're distinguishing two things, fear, you're looking at something that's imminent. Future threat we have anxiety about might be, let's say your job is contract-based or funded by grants, and in 3 months that job's going to end, and you still haven't found your next job yet. So you could have some anxiety about that. It's a future thing that could potentially happen to you. So while anxiety and fear are somewhat connected, they're distinguishable things. So let's talk about the fear component more. So fear is associated with surges of autonomic arousal necessary for fight or flight. Almost everybody watching this video has had a fight or flight type of response, and I'll give two quick examples of some of my own I've had in my life, but I want to speak to the issue of what's going on with this. So fight or flight is something that's different than just regular situations where you kind of know something's going on, so you kind of try to get ready for it. Fight or flight is very sudden. It's the sympathetic nervous system. Essentially, it directs the body's rapid, it's an involuntary response, a rapid involuntary response that increases your heart rate. It sends more blood to your muscles so you can have more strength, contract the muscles stronger. Basically prepares you to deal with danger that is immediate, to either run away or, if you have to fight it. So this thing with the heart rate, the way I like to think about it, because I've experienced fight or flight. It's like, to use an analogy or something that's kind of similar. If it's in a race car, if you just push the gas pedal all the way down as fast and as hard as you can, you're going to have an abrupt, sudden acceleration, right? So people who've been in a hot rod car, they know what that's like. You sink into the back seat and it's forward and you take off. That is not gradual. It's abrupt and it's sudden. So with the fight or flight, your heart rate, it just immediately starts beating really fast. Think of whatever your age predicted maximal heart rate potential can be, and it's boom, 0 to 200, whatever it is. Okay, that number. So that there's no smooth, subtle transition. So it's involuntary. And the difference is, if I am working out, if I'm doing squats or I'm doing physical exercise, maybe I'm jump roping, maybe I'm doing some interval running, but then I stop, rest a little bit, and then I run again. My heart rate, it climbs up to meet the demand of the physical demands that I'm placing upon it, the running, lifting weights, whatever. And so it gradually, progressively increases, commensurate with the intensity, if you will. I am choosing to participate in the exercise. So in effect, I do have a part in that. I'm making it happen. I'm doing a purposeful behavior. I'm thinking about what I'm doing. I'm going to do squats. I'm going to run. My heart rate's going to climb up. With fight or flight, it's involuntary. The heart rate's just going to shoot right up there. So that's why for some people this can be a scary thing. It's like, there's something to be said for a panic attack. That's kind of a side issue. But to keep it on point with just talking flight and flight in and of itself, it can be dangerous if you startle somebody. You think you're being funny. You can cause that fight or flight and end up punching you because you startled them and they just throw a punch and smack you. And, oh, I'm sorry, you scared me, right? That's happened. So scaring people thinking you're being funny can actually be dangerous sometimes. So what does this have to do with a lot of what's going on? Because these are different things. Most people don't have fight or flight all the time. So 2 quick examples, so you may help you understand this. As when I was a child, like a lot of people, I walked home from school. I was probably like 9 years old, maybe 8. I think it was 3rd or 4th grade. And I would walk home after school when school let out. So like a lot of houses, even today, back then, there was a couple of shortcuts I would take and what have you, but some of the houses that had like German Shepherds, Doberman Pinschers, the larger type dogs, they'd usually be behind the fence, but not chained up. So one time I was walking home, and I think it was the German Shepherd, very large dog, and to a kid, it's huge, was unchained, and it charged at me out of nowhere. And talk about fear and being frightened, my heart rate, everything, immediately, boom, I was in the fight or flight. I call it like the temporary super strength, right? So I kid you not, I ran faster than I ever had in my life up to that point. There was even a fence that I had basically determined of a different yard. If I can get over that fence, that I'm safe from the dog, I flew over that fence. I was like a freaking Olympic athlete because of the fight or flight. I temporarily had a surge of energy and power and strength and speed. So what that has to do with, it was involuntary, automatic in terms of the physiological response, but it has to do with instinct and survival to get away from the danger. And if I had to, I suppose I would have had to fight, but I would have had a better situation, a better prognosis of surviving and living. So that is normal, part of the human experience. That can happen to anybody. If you see a bear in the woods, there's a good chance you're going to run from the bear, especially if it's a female with cubs, right? So one more quick example, and I want to give this one because I think it takes it to another level in terms of the evidence of that involuntary response. I was asleep, this old townhome I lived in, and I sleep good. I've never had issues with that. But, like pretty much anybody, if there's sufficient external stimulation, outside noise, whatever, it's going to wake you up. So in the parking lot, there broke out a disturbance, a fight, and I woke up abruptly. I was startled and to the sound of hearing bodies slamming into cars, yelling and cursing. I heard a woman screaming like in distress, and a bunch of commotion going on, and it was sudden. I just woke up and I heard all this. So no sooner than my eyes woke up, I literally physically was leaping out of my bed, and my heart boom, fight or flight. It was involuntary. My heart was going 100 miles per hour, and it was a scary type feeling. I just felt like I needed to do something. I needed to fight, run. Something needed to happen. That was a physiological response because of being startled and all that commotion going outside. It freaked me out and caught me off guard. Once I had a chance to settle down just a bit, and it didn't take too long, I started processing and thinking and evaluating. I realized that, okay, there's a fight outside. I'm inside. I have my door locked. I'm fine. Ain't nothing going to happen to me. So once I was able to then calm myself down, my heart rate went back to normal, I called the police and informed them, hey, there's a fight outside, a domestic disturbance of the peace, if you will, and plus people maybe getting hurt. And then I went outside and was responsible about it. I did what I could to help de-escalate things, and fortunately it went okay. And that's what it was, but that was the fight or flight. So you get the idea, excuse me. And some of y'all may have other scenarios where you had that response. So this in and of itself doesn't mean I have an anxiety disorder. It doesn't mean I have a panic disorder. The operative word is a disorder, okay? So that is a normal response if you're, most human beings. Most people have built in a reasonable amount of fear that keeps us alive, and that's to be expected. So this is an extreme end when we're looking at fear that's right up on you, immediate type of threats. So anxiety is a bit different because it's not. Anxiety can just be like a general type of anxiety. For some people, if it's not one thing, and then it kind of floats to or shifts to something else. For other people, it may be more specific about some of the things I'm going to talk about in the dimensions of wellness that I'll put up here for you to see. Occupational, finances, social, things like that can be sources of anxiety in terms of anticipating things that could be a problem in the future. So you have that distinguishing difference. So what about right now, this year, recent things that's going on? Not everything has to be the extreme end of a fight or flight response to feel like you either need to escape something or you need to take it on, figuratively speaking. I need to deal with this threat, right? You can be kind of in the middle and have a sense of urgency to do something. So people laugh about all the people that bought all the toilet paper this year. Look at all these crazy people buying all the toilet paper. What's the matter? What's the matter with them? Toilet paper, it's not going to protect you from a virus. And you know what? You're right. Toilet paper is not going to protect you from a virus. Now, there's a couple of levels to this or more. There's a practical level that people are thinking, well, if I have to stay home, which actually, even then, you're still going to be allowed to go to the grocery store. So that's not really a full rationalization to go crazy and buy all the toilet paper, right? But people were thinking, I need to make sure I have all these things in place. And then it went on to the food and so on. So part of it, in my opinion, is that when people feel duress in terms of either an immediate fear or anxiety of something that's down the road, or maybe in the middle, as human beings, we feel the need to have to act upon something, whether it's to remove that source of anxiety to get away from it or fear, or to address it, to do something about it to where you can make yourself feel safer or better about the situation, or protect yourself that, hey, I feel better because I'm doing something. And human beings will tend to gravitate towards things they feel they have control over within the options of what do I have control over? Well, with a virus, at that point, there's a lot of unknowns about it. They're starting to talk about precautions and things like that, social distance, things you can do to help minimize catching it or giving it to other people. So people don't know a lot at that point. So what really can they do to reduce this anxiety? So in my opinion, going out and hoarding and buying all that and toilet paper, even though logically it don't make sense that it's going to make you any safer from catching COVID-19, because we're doing something. I feel better, So that action being put into place to do things, it can help people feel less anxious, even though it's not really rational, because all the toilet paper in the world will not protect you from a virus. So in treatment settings where I've worked in different levels of care, or sometimes people who are dealing with issues in their life, when they have a sense of limited options, limited things they have control over, when they're under stress, or perhaps they may be being held accountable for something as part of their treatment, they don't have much recourse at certain times in their life because of where they're at. So they'll gravitate towards certain things that they feel, I still got control of this, right? I can still make a decision over this, and even though logically it has nothing to do with the outcome I would like, it's the only thing I have control over, so I'm going to focus on that. So sometimes our interventions are not always logical, but as human beings we just try to do things about it. Sometimes they're unhealthy coping mechanisms or unhealthy behaviors. I'll talk some more about that as we move forward into the video. So that's just something I want to throw out there, is that, yeah, it's kind of funny, people buying up all the toilet paper, but at the same time, I can understand the fear, anxiety, the uncertainty, that rather than, people, if they just stay home and do nothing, that can be even scarier, but they feel they're getting out and doing something, right? So anyways, and just for the record, I survived the toilet paper crisis of 2020. I never ran out of toilet paper. So not to brag, but it's just what it is. So anyways, all right. So in all seriousness, I want to move the video forward, because what I'm really getting at today is that there's a purpose for anxiety. There are people before 2020, and I want to distinguish this real quick, like before I get into the anxiety I want to talk more about. There are people before 2020 that may, before all of this, and just in general, may have underlying medical conditions. To the extent what the physiological reason exactly is, it may vary. But the truth is, there are some people that unless they have assistance with medication, either prescribed by a psychiatrist or a physician that's medically supervising them, to stabilize their symptoms enough to where then they can further benefit from cognitive behavioral psychotherapies, learning coping skills and so on, to further help manage an anxiety type of disorder. There are some of those people who exist like that. You may have some people with some serious trauma that, as a result of that, they have a more comprehensive type of way of managing and treating anxiety that requires, maybe they do see a psychiatrist, okay? So there is that level or that extent of anxiety for certain people, anxiety type disorders. That criteria involves that the anxiety is so severe that it disrupts your life. It can disrupt your ability to hold a job. It impacts your relationships, social issues, and so on. It is disruptive, hence the word a disorder. So that's some people. Most people don't necessarily have an anxiety disorder. What they have is that, they can have problems with anxiety in that they're experiencing more stress because the way they manage anxiety, or how they don't have appropriate ways to cope with that anxiety. Life can be, you can be unnecessarily more anxious or fearful than you need to, and you're not allowing anxiety to fulfill its purpose in your life. You can have problems with anxiety and still be a functional person. Your relationships can be intact. You're able to work. You're able to pay your bills. For the most part, you're considered functional. You're not meeting the requirements, if you will, to warrant a diagnosis of a disorder, and now you need treatment. So most people are these type that all human beings are going to deal with anxiety, and that's what I want to talk about in this video in terms of how do we move forward the pandemic? How can we actually use our anxiety during this challenging year for a positive outcome? So not all anxiety is bad for you. Anxiety motivates us into action. It has a purpose. And I want to talk about a few examples that I can use, and then I want to get into the barriers things that get in the way of us being able to use anxiety. So anxiety has a purpose. It motivates us to action. Some easy examples are most people who have a job. We feel anxious for a lot of things particular to our job. So my job, one of the requirements is I need to wake up in time and get to work on time and be ready to start doing my duties at work. So what do? Anxiety motivates me into action to set the alarm on my phone. Anxiety motivates me into action to make sure I go to bed at a decent hour. My knowledge of the truth that my supervisor will not be happy if I'm late to work every day and potentially could fire me in the future, a future threat, motivates me into action to be on time to work. my anxiety about the fact that if I don't perform the standard at work, I could lose my job, motivates me into action to do a good job, right? Sounds pretty basic and simple, but it's true. So what about something different, like as a personal trainer? I have people that come see me for my personal training services because of anxiety. Anxiety motivated them into action when they had a physical health crisis. They had a physical checkup with the doctor, and their lab works and their physical exam revealed that they had borderline diabetes or pre-diabetes for type 2, and their doctor had suggested, or basically their treatment recommendation was that they needed to lose weight and need to get on a diet. Exercise is the exercise is recommended. So because of the anxiety motivating them into action, they sought out help in terms of to learn how it is to begin an exercise program, how they can get on a better nutrition plan, started exercising, eating correctly according to their goals for weight loss, and so on. So this anxiety about the health crisis resulted in them essentially doing something about it, a plan of action. You get that idea. So as the case is with a lot of individuals over the years, in this example I'm using with the pre-diabetes or diabetes type 2, this particular individual, they lose 35, 40 pounds, change the way they're eating, clean everything up in terms of their diet and their nutrition, and the exercise. Specific to the exercise, the acute adaptation to exercising is that the body is still producing insulin, it becomes sensitive to the insulin again. So the insulin can do its job, break down blood glucose for energy, metabolize it, and so on. So your blood sugars don't build up. The pre-diabetes type 2 and so on, they become desensitized to their insulin because of being sedentary, being overweight, and so on and so on. So this anxiety for this individual and others like this individual over the years is that they didn't understand, in their cases, have the knowledge to understand how all this worked, but they cared, the anxiety motivated them like, I need to do something about this. Think about a health crisis like diabetes type 2. It's not like fight or flight, necessarily like fight or flight, where either you're going to try to run away necessarily, because you can't outrun, figuratively speaking, you can't run away from diabetes type 2. I'm going to talk about that a little more when we get into the cognitive part. You can't run away from a diabetes type 2. You got to have a plan of action. You got to confront it. You got to deal with it. You got to do something about it. So in that way, for this individual, the anxiety motivates us to action, motivated him to action. It was useful. It had a purpose, okay? So that is another example of how anxiety can motivate us into action. And we're seeing a lot of that go on right now with at least my own experience with the circles that I'm connected to and people in life, is that before the pandemic, let's be honest, a lot of people took things for granted, were comfortable, myself included. There's some things that, man, I didn't realize how much more you appreciate things. When things change like the way they did this year. So all the things that we've had to do. So that sense of urgency before the pandemic may not have been there yet, because the perception up here, we talked about the word perceived, we didn't perceive anything that was right up on us, imminent or necessarily a threat down the road. We felt comfortable enough. Our situation that we're in was enabling enough for us to feel sufficiently comfortable to where there was not a sense of urgency to try to have a plan of action for a lot of things. Myself, I have a few things that actually, because of this pandemic and shutdown this year that happened, everything that's going on, it actually created a sense of urgency for me, a bit of anxiety, that I put to work. And because of it, I got a lot of things accomplished already sooner, that now it's a good thing for me. I'm in a good place because I used that productively. I got on the ball and accomplished a lot of things and did a lot of things that put me in a better situation now. Now, would have I done the same things had the pandemic not happened? Yeah, I probably would have got them done, but honestly, I don't think I would have got them done as quickly. So anyways, so that was a positive of it, me kind of putting that sense of urgency to work and that plan of, and having a plan of action to address it, right? Because I can't outrun the realities for certain things. I'm going to have to fight them or have a plan of action, figuratively speaking. So with the sense of urgency, having a plan, what are you going to do about it? We talk about anxiety, oh, I don't want anxiety. Some people drink alcohol. Alcohol will make you feel less anxious, even though technically it acts on the body as a depressant. You feel less anxious when you drink. Some of the medications that are used for anti-anxiety, like benzodiazepine, this is similar in makeup as far as the alcohol. If you look at the molecule, it's similar. It makes you feel less anxious. So, and also can be dangerous too. Anyway, that's another side issue. So, these things, as far as what people may do, unhealthy ways to try to escape anxiety, the unhealthy ways like using alcohol, comfort eating, comfort foods, things that are unhealthy. Some people may have started smoking cigarettes again because of stress, anxiety, and so on. So these are things that are happening. Now, I will say the other side of that has happened because of the sense of urgency. People who are more at risk for COVID-19, of mortality from COVID-19, of dying because of things like smoking cigarettes, already putting the lungs under stress because of cigarette smoking, being overweight, diabetes type 2, these types of things. People before the pandemic who were smoking cigarettes, a bit overweight, borderline diabetes type 2, or they had it, they didn't have as much of a sense of urgency for the people that I know because it wasn't as salient of an issue because we're going to talk about the cognitive part here in a little bit. So the pandemic happened. Now anxiety is up because with this virus, it's a gateway to death. It's a fact. If you're obese and overweight, you have a much greater chance of dying from COVID-19, and also diabetes can complicate a lot of things too. So people are like, oh my goodness, what am I do now? I don't want to die if I get this virus, which obviously is apparently pretty contagious. So guess what? The anxiety now has reached a threshold sufficient to where that sense of urgency is there, and now they're acting upon it and they got a plan. And in that sense, the anxiety during this time period, call it a silver lining or call it a blessing in disguise. Nobody's glad the pandemic happened, but here it is, here we are. So what are you going to do about it? For certain individuals, they have channeled or used that anxiety to be motivated into action to start changing things that they needed to do anyways before all this happened, okay? So in that sense, it's a good thing. So I want to talk about, the basis of changing behaviors to make the right choices and decisions, to be healthy, to reduce anxiety, is based on going by what is true and making decisions based on what we know to be true versus distorting the truth, trying to spin things, rationalize, thinking errors, things like that. So people who don't have enough anxiety or who don't ever feel anxious about anything, who never have a sense of urgency, I have more concern for those people than people. If someone says, I'm never anxious about anything, I'm kind of wonder what's wrong with that person, because anxiety has a purpose. It can be useful. So rather, if you experience anxiety, don't ask why. It happens to human beings. Rather ask, what am I anxious about? Identify the perceived threat, whether it's immediate or down the road. So if you identify what it is and you honor the truth about it and put it on the table, now you're in a position to have a plan of action to either try to remove yourself from a situation that's bad or have a way to cope with it and deal with it healthier or to manage it better, right? So the only way that's going to happen in terms of you being able to have an outcome that has effective behavior change to protect yourself and to be in a better situation is you have to make a decision on the truth. Truth is a lot like gravity. So what do I mean by that when I say that truth is a lot like gravity? The thing is, truth is like gravity in this sense. Gravity does its thing. I can drop this highlighter marker, 100 times, 1,000 times, and with pretty good certainty, I can guarantee that it's going to keep falling. It has the gravitational pulls everything down, so I can make a good prediction and a good decision based on my truth about gravity, based on me being willing to honor the truth about gravity, right? if I respect the truth about gravity, I can make decisions that are safe and not get hurt, right? So, but the thing is, this is not what happens with a lot of people. There's people out there who want to distort or change what is true, or they want to change and make up their own facts, or they want to kind of distort things to where it feels better for them to feel less anxious. It's kind of like cognitive dissonance, basically. What will happen with people instead sometimes is that they want to distort what is known about the truth, or distort and change the facts about the truth altogether to make themselves feel less anxious or more comfortable with their current situation in terms of their behaviors that are incongruent with the truth, that are putting them at risk. So you have this type of situation happening. It's cognitive dissonance, essentially. So you have a situation that can cause anxiety, like smoking cigarettes, for example. I know the facts about smoking cigarettes. I know that it's the number one most preventable, modifiable risk factor in terms of premature decline, disease to your health, and a lot of issues with it, COPD, you get the idea. So these are facts, right? So instead of making a decision as to whether I should quit smoking based on honoring the truth, I will then rationalize, and I will find an exception to some person who lived to be 85 or 90, then they smoke cigarettes, right? So I'll look for little exceptions here and there to feel better about myself. I may, buy the pack of cigarettes that says shouldn't smoke if you're pregnant, and say, well, I'm not pregnant, I'm good, right? Little joke there. I heard a comedian say that one time. So you find basically ways to make yourself feel better, to continue in that behavior, you feel less anxious. The problem is with that is it doesn't change the truth about smoking cigarettes. It's like magical thinking. I only smoke when I go to the bingo hall. I don't smoke at home, right? So we want to feel less anxious. So, I hear people say the exception rule. I only smoke when I'm at the bingo hall. I only smoke if I'm whatever place. As if the truth about cigarettes ceases to exist based on your location. The truth is, smoking cigarettes is harmful to you no matter where you smoke them, right? So we've heard these rationalizations that people make. I'm sure most of us have heard that type of stuff. You may have done it, right? So here's the deal, is that it doesn't get rid of the threat that's tied to that truth of the unhealthy behavior. So back to my example with gravity. I think of the guy, and I'm going to give a little story here that I use when I talk to people in recovery from drugs and alcohol, and it's just a good example for changing behaviors in general that you may be struggling with. So during this pandemic, you still may be, even though you have more of a sense of urgency now, you might still be struggling a little bit with, kind of rationalizing things about, do you really need to do certain things? So here it is, you have the individual who's caught up in this game they play, right, with the truth. So they come up to a cliff or a canyon, you get the idea, and let's say it's 50 feet, 100 feet, enough to where if you step off, you can fall to your death, right? So we know about the gravity I talked about. So gravity does its thing, and the thing about gravity, it doesn't care what we think. It's going to continue to do what it does. It just does what gravity does. So the person will come to the cliff and they look down, it's 100 feet. And on the other side of the cliff, maybe there's some picnic tables or something over there. They're trying to get over there to go to a barbecue or something, right? Or it represents the other side of the cliff or canyon. It represents an outcome they say they want, or that they've been talking about. So they come to the cliff and they're looking down, and they think about the gravity, right? These experts, Albert Einstein, Sir Isaac Newton, they have their ideas about gravity and the gravitational pull and all these facts that are known about it. But you know what? That doesn't apply to me. I think I'm going to be the exception. Not everybody. Heck, I've heard stories about, people where gravity didn't completely harm them, right? But I think I can walk across this. I'm just going to magically walk across. Maybe I'll float or levitate or something like that. And I'm going to get over there. I don't care what Albert Einstein said. My neighbor, he told me the story about the time he fell off the ladder. But, all these people are telling me these things. But, I don't think that applies to me, right? Instead, the person tells themselves things that makes them feel better about stepping off that cliff, right? Pretty extreme example, but it has a point to it. So what happens, of course? The person, they try to spin the truth about gravity to feel less anxious, to justify their irresponsible behavior, and what happens? They step off that cliff, and perhaps the first time it doesn't kill them, but maybe it just breaks both their legs. They almost die, but they live. And they go to physical therapy, they get rehabbed, and for a little while they might be thinking, gosh, I think maybe there is something to that gravity now, because that sure hurt a lot. It was real painful, and I was really inconvenienced, I was out of work for a long time. So fast forward, the person heals up, they're back to walking, and they forget about the pain a bit, or it's more distant now. So maybe when they were playing around with maybe respecting the truth, now it's more distant because they forgot about all that pain from when they fell off the cliff. So the person now comes up to the cliff again, and again they're looking down, and they're thinking, I fell down that last time, but I'm okay now. And yeah, Albert Einstein, Sir Isaac Newton, all these people have been, they keep telling me this, what gravity can do to you, but it didn't get me last time, and here I am. You know what? I think this time I'm going to get it. I'm going to do it my way. My way didn't work last time, but you know what? That's not my fault. Those experts say they just don't understand me. My situation is unique. I'm different. That's another thinking area, is uniqueness, right? So guess what? The person steps off the cliff again, and this time, boom, yeah, they almost freaking die. And by the way, this has to be a hell of a human being, because they've survived 2 cliff falls by this point, and they have to from the point of my story. If they died, then I can't finish my story. So they could have died, but this time they're beat up really bad, and so they come out and they're permanently, they might be, one of the legs is not going to be the same. They go to physical therapy. They live. They had some issues. So this time, this truth here about what gravity can do to you, or how gravity affects everybody. It doesn't care who you are. It's not a respecter of person, right? It doesn't care what your religion is. Doesn't care how much money you have. Doesn't care how smart you are or how popular you are. Gravity always does its thing. So this time the person finally heals up, and you know what? They're remembering that pain. Man, just look at my life now. I don't want to die, but I want to get to that other place. I'd sure like to go over there, but I just haven't been able to get there, right? So this time they come to the cliff. They're looking down. It's a big canyon down in there. And it's 100 feet, and then they're remembering the last 2 times. So finally, the person is, you want to call it insight, right? It's not enough to be aware. Insight is knowing when is not to behave in a particular way. So the person really thinks about gravity this time and says, you know what? Albert Einstein, Sir Isaac Newton, the whole apple thing falling off the tree, and even my neighbor, when he told me about when he fell off his ladder and got hurt, you know what? I think they're onto something. I think there's evidence they're right. I'm finally going to respect and honor that truth. So I need to make a decision of how I get to the other side, though. I still want to get there, right? So finally the person looks over, and the whole time there's been a bridge. It's got a solid foundation. It's strong, big cables, and it goes all the way across to the other side. And the person really wasn't focused on that bridge the whole time, and noticing that people have been crossing that bridge this whole time. And getting to the other side, not getting hurt, and getting to where they want to be. The problem is that the person was focused on their own pride, their own rationalizations, the things that were going on, that apparently they thought their way must be right, that, the uniqueness and so on, the cognitive dissonance. Their intervention to feel less anxious was to try to change the truth, and doing that almost cost them their life, right? So this time the person makes a decision and takes that bridge. They get to the other side. They achieve that outcome. They're in a better place. The bridge represents having a plan, a program that honors the truth. You can call it a program of recovery if you're recovering from abusing food. Drugs, alcohol. If you're recovering from a disorder of depression, and you're now doing things that can work for you, you're doing your part. We always have our part in everything. So cognitive dissonance can be a barrier to responding to anxiety in a way that's going to be better for you. Cognitive dissonance, it can reduce the anxiety, but it doesn't eliminate the threat to your life, to your health, or to your problems. So the truth about, changing behavior is always going to be about honoring and respecting what the truth is. And then once you have the truth about whatever the threat is, the decisions you make and how you respond to it need to address that based on that directly. So if I know cigarettes can cause me to have COPD, it can cause a lot of other issues, then it would behoove me to factor that in and respect that, honor it. Don't spin it. It's what it is. You're not that unique. Cigarettes can damage you, damages everybody. So your decision needs to be based on that, whether if you quit or not, but at least you're respecting the truth. It's your decision. People will say that, well, I'm just going to smoke anyways, and I'll just deal with the consequences. But at least they're not distorting the truth, right? So a plan of action that honors the truth. You're going to smoking. You're like, okay, I know this is going to do me in. I'm going to start chewing gum instead. That'll kind of be a replacement behavior temporarily when I get a craving. I'm going to begin exercising, drinking more water. So now, because you honored the truth, your corresponding behaviors are going to support change in behavior. With the gravity, distorting the truth about gravity did not result in corresponding and behaviors that were productive to change in behavior, to build a bridge, right, that's going to get you where you want to be. What it did was help the person in a maladaptive way. They felt less anxious, and they still got hurt. Could have killed them. In reality, if you fall that far, it can cost you your life. Sometimes people don't get that second chance to reevaluate their way of thinking and so on. So I hope some of this is useful in terms of how you can think about anxiety, and how either the things we do can, whether it increases it or decreases it. It's the response that matters in terms of either addressing the source of what's causing the anxiety. That's very important, especially to behaviors that are unhealthy for us. So the pandemic, this year, the 2020, everything that's going on, you can use anxiety in a purposeful, useful fashion to be motivated into action. And part of that is, the thinking part that I talked about in terms of evaluating how honest we're being with respecting the truth about certain things and how we make decisions to have better outcomes. Now, in the beginning of the video, I did mention the 8 dimensions of wellness. You can Google it, Sam's website and then other ones, it'll have these listed here. So you have, it mentions emotional, environmental, intellectual, physical, financial, social, spiritual, and occupational. All of those are important. So, one of these areas being impacted, it can affect the whole system. Stress and anxiety, a lot of times, comes from different areas, and we got to have a plan in terms of for different things. The plans may vary or be different. So right now, guess what the main 2 of these in the 8 dimensions that people are focused on? It's occupational and finances. That's a no-brainer. There's no surprise there. So people right now, because of the shutdown, loss of employment, even to an extent, a crisis of in terms of purpose and meaning of where they fit in life now, a lot of people's identity, self-esteem, and concept of themselves is tied into their occupation, whether you're a truck driver, a teacher. In my case, I'm a personal trainer and a licensed counselor. So it's part of, when you go out, people ask you, what do you do? And you tell them your job, what it is you do. It's a part of who you are. It's not all of what you are, who you are, but it's a part of those characteristics that makes up who we are. So for some, this can be more of an impact than others, that if that's affected or taken away, it's not just about the practical part of a paycheck so you can pay your bills. It can be a blow or setback to their emotional or psychological health, because it's part of their identity. I know people who've become anxious and or depressed when they lost the ability to do a particular job that was a part of who they were for a long time, and then they had to learn different job skills. I used to be a vocational rehabilitation counselor, so I've seen those types of issues. So we're dealing with, during the shutdown, not just people or the economy open up slowly. A lot of people are back to work already, but there's still certain industries that are being restricted, and there's still people who are not back to work yet because there are some hiring freezes for some industries. So anyways, right up here, this occupational vocational part, it's a lot of it is not just the money part. That's, most people think just about the money, but it has to do with a sense of purpose. Having a sense of purpose is important to our health, and going to work and doing the things we do, whether you're a custodian, a mechanic, a teacher, it doesn't matter. Martin Luther King, he said, I believe, to quote it, if I don't get it exact, he says that all work that uplifts has dignity, purpose, right? So it's us, we're the ones, we bring that dignity to the work we do. So it's different situations for different people. So if that is disrupted and you haven't worked in 3-4 months, even if you have money in the bank, that can still be a source of anxiety and stress, because now your whole question of who you are, if you want to look at it like an existential issue, your search for meaning, purpose, how you fit into the context of everything in life. So certain people are dealing with that anxiety and stress, maybe even fear, like what's going to happen to me in the future? Who am I going to be, right? So something that I feel, in my opinion, helps with that is if you're not yet back to work, remember, people feel like if you feel like you're doing something, having a plan of action that's going to help reduce anxiety, doing nothing to address the what of that situation is. In this case, the what would be loss of a sense of purpose or meaning because you're not going to work no more. So you identify that is, and if that's you, and you say, hey, you know what? That represents how I'm feeling. So now we can try to do something about that situation. So if it's practical things about, I need to get a job, right? There's resources out there, Texas Workforce Commission Solutions, Workforce Solutions in Texas, or your state has an equivalent place you can go. You can register. That helps increases your chance for employment. It's a plan of action. You feel better that you're doing something, and there's light at the end of the tunnel. That will help reduce some anxiety because you feel like it's something that you have control over and you're doing. If you have a mental health or a physical type of a disability or situation that may impact your ability to obtain and maintain employment, then you can look into vocational rehabilitation programs to get plugged back into working again. So there's resources out there, you get the idea, that can help alleviate some of that stress and get the support you need. Certain people are, there's unemployment and so on and so on. So there's things that are practical oriented that are going to help you. But as regards to the aspect of working and having a sense of purpose, what you can do today right now, even if you don't have a job immediately, that can help you feel less anxious, that can help you feel better about yourself as far as self-esteem. And some people may be depressed, feeling pretty sad about things, is to get involved with your in the community. It could be your neighborhood, and do things that help other people who may not be able to help themselves. You can volunteer a bit. It might be elderly people down the street, mow their lawn. Do things that, because especially right now, they may have anxiety themselves. They're more vulnerable. You can do things, if you want to use the word good deeds. There's something to be said about giving and expecting nothing back in return, but it's okay to feel good about helping people. There's nothing wrong with that. So it's good for your health to do things to help other people, whether it's helping people around the neighborhood, volunteering at an agency or a place that helps other individuals who need support and help and would be appreciative of that. So that would be purposeful. It helps you feel better. And you don't have to do it every day, but it could be a few times a week. So that sense of purpose and you can be creative with that. It can be a lot of things that helps you to cope with the stress of feeling like you've lost your sense of purpose because you're not at work no more. So the social aspect up here, of the dimensions of wellness, yes, we know that we got to practice social distance, and there's precautions and so on. But for the most part, you can still go outside, go to certain parks, things like that. You can still, go out and do things. So you're not completely without options. So there's no reason to not nurture that part of your wellness, our human need for social connection, right? Other people. And our sense of purpose can be connected into being addressing this social dynamic aspect, and as far as us needing to have that purpose and meaning. So that's something that I'm a big believer in. When I've had periods of in-betweens jobs when I was younger, I wouldn't sit home on the couch and say, well, if I'm not being paid, that's it, I'm done. No, I'm not going to stop living my life. I'm still going to have purpose. I'm going to do things, get involved, and get plugged into something. And it's good for you, and it can lead to good things for you. So I think you get the idea in terms of what I mean, in terms of how anxiety, it can have a purpose, and it motivates us to action. And it's how we respond to the anxiety and put our behavior into action that it can be positive for us. And anxiety is something that we don't want to completely disappear. People who, again, the cognitive dissonance, you distort the truth about, let's use cigarette smoking again. Well, that doesn't apply to me, or I don't believe that, or whatever excuse you want to make. While it makes you feel less anxious, that's a bad thing, because now you're not motivated to action to stop smoking cigarettes. It would be better and a healthier way of thinking to do this. A suggestion would be to acknowledge the truth, like I mentioned. You know what? Cigarette smoking, that is bad. It can shorten my life. I can get COPD. It's what it is. But I'm going to be honest with myself and just say, you know what? There's things about cigarette smoking that I like about it, and I'm just not ready to quit yet. And I still feel anxious about it. I feel guilty when some people use the word, I feel guilty when I light the next one because I know I shouldn't do it. But it's anxiety, right? It would be better that you leave that anxiety out there, because eventually, over time, that anxiety can help you to stop smoking. Because a lot of times with stopping unhealthy behaviors, it's usually a process. When I quit smoking cigarettes, I got a whole separate video on that. When I finally got to a position, I was done, and that was it, and I never picked them up again. But the process, I respected the truth about it. I knew it wasn't good for me. And because I allowed that to linger there, although I had some behaviors that were back and forth, I did not deny the truth. The anxiety still stayed around in terms of every time I would smoke, to eventually anxiety prevailed enough to where I was motivated to action to truly be serious and be done with smoking cigarettes. So we don't want to completely eliminate all anxiety. As I mentioned before, I'm more concerned about people who say they're never anxious for nothing. You need a certain reasonable amount. So anyways, I think y'all get the idea. One last thing I want to say before I finish this video and wrap it up. There's a lot of other things I know that can be said about anxiety disorders, what anxiety is, how to manage it. And I know there's more than one way to look at it. So if you have a different way, you know what, that's great. There's more than, 5 plus 5 equals 10, but so does 3 plus 7, right? There's a lot of different ways to get the same outcome. So if there's a comment maybe you want to leave, that there's something else you want to add, that's fantastic. So I want to add one more point before I finish up. So the election year in November, presidential election, these are periodic every 4 years. And this is not a partisan comment. It's not about Republican or Democrat. And it's not an endorsement one way or the other. People are diverse and they're going to make their own decisions, and I respect that. So what I want to say in regards to the presidential elections, and this year with everything else that's going on, the anxiety, the stress levels, the potential for conflict is compounded, and it's greater, in my opinion, than in any election year since I've lived in. I'm 49 years old, and this is I don't think I've seen anything as close to this, in my opinion. So with everything that's been going on, so this is my thoughts on it, and this is how I have lived my life. You have Republican presidents and Democrat presidents come and go. Senate and Congress, you see a shift back and forth over the years in terms of majorities, minorities, and so on. And even at a state level, local level, you get the idea. Policies, we may not always agree on them. There's a lot of things I do not agree with. Some of it I do, some I don't. And I think 50% of the time, maybe a little better sometimes, we see things go in a direction that we like, and the other 50% or less of the time, maybe they don't go in the direction we like, whether it be legislation, policies for various issues, right? So where am I going with this? This is what I've said, this is how I feel, is that I know some people, when it goes back and forth in terms of who's in the White House, the president, people can be upset or bitter that their person did not win, and that can linger on and manifest out in conflicts and so on. So with myself, I vote, I do what I can, but when it's done, I move my life forward and continue to live my life. And here's the point I want to make with all this. At the end of the day, this is not about Republican, it's not about Democrat, it's about us. It's how we choose to treat each other. I don't need the permission from the President of the United States of America to make a decision to decide I'm going to be a good human being and I'm going to treat my neighbor good. I'm going to be nice to people or nicer to people. I don't need a bill or a law passed that says I get to go bless my neighbor if I want to. If I have the extra money and I know somebody's down in their luck and I want to buy them groceries or maybe help them fix their car, that has nothing to do with Republican or Democrat or whose ideology, left or right or president. It has nothing to do with that. If you want to get down into the nitty gritty, that has to do with us. That's us. There's no law that says I can't go be good to people. It's not illegal for people to come together and do good things. There's no law that says we can't, treat each other with respect, compassion, and build each other up and lift each other up only if your president that you voted for wins, then only you can be that way, or if it's a Republican or Democrat majority. That's ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense. But people get committed to certain things, and unfortunately that can play out sometimes in how we view our own power. My power is me in terms of how I treat you. If I want to treat you with respect, if I want to have compassion towards you, if I want to try to do things to help better my community, it doesn't have anything to do with who wins an election per se, in terms of me doing the best I can within the situation we have. That's my control. I can't blame the news. There's a lot of bad news, I agree. It's a sensationalized things. You hear about all these things that are happening, natural disasters, car crashes, things going on in politics, sensational things you'll hear about celebrities, whatever stuff. And like, why do I need to know that, right? In terms of what's more important in the bigger picture of the world and our country and society. So there's a lot of truth to that. How come there's not more good news, right? So I get that argument, and I can agree with the point about the question about that. What I will say is that even though there's a lot of negative news out there on a lot of networks, at the end of the day, it's still up to you. You don't have to let that be a reason for you to not be a better person, be in control of yourself, and to be in charge of the way you think, to make decisions for yourself, think things through, and come to your own conclusions based on being somebody who looks at a larger context versus, being affected by anxiety and fear, which overrides the intellect that you're born with, that capacity, if you use it and apply it and have critical thinking. It's another way to reduce anxiety, is to fact check things, think critically, look at the bigger picture, take a deep breath, consider other options and possibilities. And if you're wrong about something, then that's okay. It's okay to be wrong sometimes, right? So being okay with that can reduce anxiety, because we have another thing called pride that can get in the way, that we think we can't be wrong. And that's not a good place to be in. So anyways, those are my 2 cents on the whole election thing. As part of this year, in my opinion, about thinking about the future, November, it's going to be okay if you decide it's going to be okay. I'm believing it's going to be okay in terms of how I'm going to choose how I manage myself, because that's on me, regardless of who the president is. So I hope this video was helpful. I probably forgot to say a lot of things I intended to. That's why I got to make more than one video, and I try to keep them where they're not too long. Thank you, and have a good day.